You're a Roman citizen living in the grand city of Rome, and you just got yourself a brand new villa. It's got everything: marble floors, heated baths, and even a fancy mosaic of a guy getting trampled by a horse. Life is good. But there's one tiny problem. How do you keep thieves from breaking in and stealing your prized possessions? In the bustling metropolis of the Mediterranean world, where over 1 million people lived, worked, and constantly worried about getting robbed blind, the city was alive. Crowded markets buzzing with energy, the rhythmic clatter of carts on stone streets, merchants shouting over each other like a pack of auctioneers on espresso. Most Roman citizens weren't living in fancy villas, though. They were crammed into insulae, ancient Roman apartments, stacked 6, 7, or even 8 stories high. And guess what? No elevators. If you lived on the top floor, congratulations, your daily leg day was built right into your rent. Imagine living in a place where your neighbors' arguments, cooking disasters, and questionable life choices were separated from you by a wooden partition thinner than a senator's promises. The problem here was that Rome had no reliable police force. This meant that the citizens, in most cases, had to take care of their security themselves. And in the absence of police, security cameras, which you can check from your phone, or modern apartment valets, a number of them actually did have door locks and keys to try and protect themselves from the rampant crime in the city. However, ancient Roman locks were by no means a modern smart lock, which one can just get on Amazon. A typical Roman lock at that time was more compact, more durable, and slightly harder to pick than ancient Mesopotamian locks, which were primitive wooden locks, and calling them secure is like calling a plastic grocery bag a parachute. These early locks were made of wood and used a pin tumbler system. In fact, breaking into some homes required about as much skill as opening a bag of chips. I guess you can't really blame the intruders when the home security system was basically just hope. In addition to such locks and keys, Romans who lived in larger houses and in the countryside often relied on thick wooden doors with massive crossbars that made sure nobody was getting in or out without permission. Think of it like the ancient version of those huge sliding bolt locks you see in horror movies right before something bad happens. Differently from horror movies, however, where the bad guys are still easily able to breach them, these were heavy enough that it would take a couple of burglars to break in. When secured for the night, they turned the entrance into a barricade, cutting off the household from the dangers of the outside world, unless the robbers brought battering rams with them. All of this proves that private property was immensely valued in ancient Rome. However, it's worth noting that locking your door might not always be much help in stopping burglars. In the Greek parts of the empire and in earlier Hellenistic times, a common term for burglars was toi chorouchos, literally one who digs through the walls. And no, this wasn't some poetic exaggeration. Many Roman homes, especially those belonging to middling families, weren't exactly Fort Knox. Built with little more than wattle and daub, a charmingly rustic combination of wooden frames, straw, and mud, these walls were about as effective at stopping a determined burglar as a modern tent. You could put the sturdiest wooden bar across your door, but that wouldn't mean much if the thief could simply tunnel through your living room like an oversized mole. Imagine tucking yourself in for the night, convinced that your crude wooden door and iron lock were keeping your family and belongings safe, only to wake up to the disorienting sound of plaster crumbling and a stranger's head poking through your wall. Imagine the rent prices with neighbors such as these. Yet the relative lack of effective public safety meant that the Romans took private security to extreme measures. Of course, there were multiple other methods used by the Romans in order to keep their possessions secure. Romans did not only entrust the security of their estates to inanimate objects. A wooden door and a rusty pin lock? Please. That's like expecting your Wi-Fi password to keep out a professional hacker. Nothing beats human security, and they took this to the next level. Wealthy families often hired slaves or personal guards to watch over their property 24/7. In fact, they called these people both slaves and hired guards, ostari, a word that translates into doorman and gives root to the modern word ostiary. But don't let the fancy etymology fool you. These guys weren't just standing around handing out visitor badges. They were the first and last line of defense, the human equivalent of a high-security alarm system with a really bad attitude. If they were enslaved, their service wasn't just expected, it was enforced, as they would often even be chained directly to the door to make sure that they both did not run away and that they did their job. Talk about responsibility. As for hired personnel, these weren't just any security guards standing around half menacingly and eating donuts, yearning for a break. Most were trained fighters, hardened by years of experience in the streets or on the battlefield. They carried short swords, clubs, or even spears, ready to act at the first sign of an intruder. Because, when in Rome, why not hire a guy with a sword to watch your stuff? These private security forces, often referred to as custodes or vigilantes, took their jobs seriously, like no days off, seriously. Yes, the word vigilante, which we know from superhero movies and TV shows, traces its roots to here. These people weren't just decorative muscle standing outside a villa. They were a necessity. Unlike Batman, they didn't have fancy gadgets or a moral code against killing. The wealthier you were, the more likely you were to attract trouble. And in a city where the night belonged to the bold, hiring an armed protector wasn't just a flex, it was a survival strategy. Some of these guards were even ex-gladiators, their combat skills honed from years in the arena. Imagine trying to rob a house only to be met with a scarred, battle-hardened warrior whose resume includes defeated 3 men and a lion in single combat. Of course, not all security hires were quite so professional. Some were little more than thugs for hire, paid in denarii and free wine, who might be just as likely to rob the house themselves if the price was right. There are even accounts of particularly unscrupulous guards forming secret pacts with local criminals, an ancient version of the classic inside job. And if the price was right, well, let's just say some of these guys had a very flexible sense of loyalty. There are even reports of guards teaming up with criminals for an ancient take on the classic inside job, like if your home security system came with a built-in hacker. For the ultra-rich, security wasn't just about hiring a couple of burly guys to stand at the gate looking intimidating. Some noble families had full-blown household militias. Think of them as personal SWAT teams, except with more bronze armor and fewer tactical vests. Others preferred a more bureaucratic approach, slipping some extra cash to Rome's official night watch, the cohortes vigilum, for VIP-level protection. But even that wasn't foolproof. In a city as bustling and crime-ridden as Rome, if someone wanted your stuff badly enough, they'd find a way to take it. And especially for the wealthy, this was not just a show of their status, it was an answer to a very real problem. Because while today's billionaires worry about cyber hacks and rogue paparazzi, back then your biggest concern was whether your own guards had secretly sold your silverware to the highest bidder. In the Eternal City, the night belonged to those who were bold enough to take what they wanted. Interestingly, a widespread way of keeping one's estates secure in ancient Rome was to own a guard dog. The good old-fashioned four-legged security system is a man's best friend. Now, this is something which was by no means pioneered by the Romans, as dogs had been used for the same purpose in, you guessed it, various Mesopotamian cultures thousands of years earlier than in ancient Rome. However, the Romans adopted this practice on a large scale, and it eventually became an intriguing part of their culture, especially in the countryside. Picture this. You're walking along a dusty road outside Rome, the summer heat rising in shimmering waves off the stone pavement. The scent of warm earth and olive groves lingers in the air. You pass by a villa, its grand walls draped in creeping ivy, and just as you near the entrance, your eyes catch a small inscription at your feet. That's right. If you were strolling around ancient Rome, you might spot these signs outside doors. Cave Canem, which means beware of the dog. And these weren't your average lapdogs who were used to wearing warm sweaters when they are taken outside for a walk. Romans loved big, mean guard dogs, especially Molossian hounds, basically the ancient cousin of modern-day mastiffs. Imagine a security system that barks and bites. Guard dogs were specially bred for power, aggression, and unwavering loyalty, the kind of dog that was by no means all bark and no bite, but could do the latter if the situation called for it. Their heavy paws thudded against the marble floors, their massive heads lowered in warning, ears pricked to catch the sound of an unfamiliar footstep. To approach a Roman villa uninvited was to gamble with your limbs, and there were no good prosthetics to replace them with. In fact, a number of mosaics have been discovered in the ancient city of Pompeii, yes, the one that was destroyed by the volcano Vesuvius, that depict big black guard dogs warning the visitors of the villas that the property is in safe paws. In short, guard dogs weren't just practical security, they were a statement. A well-trained guard dog meant a house was protected, a visible deterrent to thieves and trespassers. The warning signs weren't just for show, the Romans took pride in their guardians, and the message was clear: trespass at your own risk, because this house doesn't just have walls, it has teeth. Of course, house security was one thing, but the Romans were absolute geniuses when it came to securing whole fortifications. Taking these fortifications was no easy task. Imagine playing a tower defense game in real life. Romans understood the necessity of these structures, and their military engineers didn't just build walls, they created layered, nearly impenetrable defenses that turned their forts into nightmares for any would-be attacker. Many of the designs which we are going to mention were so popular that they were widely adopted during the medieval era, the time that is usually associated with large stone castles with towers tens of meters high. These fortifications weren't just sprinkled around the empire for fun, they were everywhere. From the soggy marshes of Britain, where Roman soldiers probably regretted their career choices, to the dense forests of Germania, where forts had to double as giant mosquito repellents, and even the scorching sands of the Near East, where your biggest enemy wasn't just invaders, but the sun. Now, approaching a well-developed Roman fort wasn't a simple matter of marching up to the gates, knocking, and demanding entry. Roman forts featured multiple levels of defense in addition to walls and gates. In the first place, there were deep ditches in front of tiers of enormous earthworks that made it practically impossible for an opponent to charge the walls without falling into a pit. These deep, wide ditches, sometimes filled with sharpened stakes, were known as a fossa. They could be over 3 meters deep and were often paired with a second or even third trench beyond it. Charging straight at the walls was an exercise in futility. You'd either break your ankle tumbling into a pit or get stuck in a tangled mass of sharpened wooden stakes, an early form of barbed barricade. However, let's assume that you somehow made your way through the ditches. Good luck! You're officially having the worst day of your life, because now you're staring up at massive earthworks so steep they'd make a mountain goat reconsider its life choices. And no, these weren't just random dirt piles. Roman engineers packed them with layers of earth, stone, and clay, creating slopes so unfriendly that even a parkour expert would struggle. If you did manage to claw your way up, spoiler, you most likely wouldn't, you'd be greeted by towering timber palisades, reinforced gates, and watchtowers filled with soldiers. And let's talk about those defenders. Let's be honest, nothing screams, "You're not getting in," like a 30-foot stone monstrosity with archers on top. Roman soldiers weren't just experts at forming the tetsudo, that legendary shield wall. They also excelled at turning invaders into pincushions. Archers perched in stone watchtowers rained arrows down, while soldiers armed with pillium javelins stood behind the battlements ready to yeet them straight into anyone foolish enough to get close. You think dodgeball was rough in gym class? Try dodging a pillium while scaling a wall with 50 pounds of armor. And if that wasn't bad enough, Roman forts were basically designed to make your life miserable. Attackers were forced into exposed positions where they had the delightful experience of facing arrows, javelins, and, wait for it, boiling oil. That's right. If you somehow weren't perforated yet, you'd get hit with a fresh dose of medieval deep frying. Oh, and just for fun, they also threw scalding sand. Yes, sand. Because why just burn your enemies when you can also blind them? Honestly, at this point, an astronaut suit might not even save you, let alone a wooden shield. And how can we forget the siege weaponry? Siege weapons were extensively used in the later periods when Rome had reached the height of its prosperity. Ballistae, which were essentially giant crossbows manned by at least 3 persons, and onagers, the Roman equivalents of catapults, were positioned strategically along the walls of the stronghold. Any invader who approached too closely may end up playing a very bad game of dodgeball with burning projectiles. In short, it wasn't just about brute strength. Every inch of a Roman fort was calculated, engineered, and designed to make an enemy's life a living hell. The Romans understood that a well-fortified position could make even a small garrison feel like an unstoppable force. That is why they were the masters of the known world for hundreds of years. So, there you have it. This is how the ancient Romans kept their homes and fortresses safe without using locks. Thick doors, angry dogs, enslaved doorkeepers, heavily armed guards, water ditches, and weapons were popularized by the Romans as effective methods of keeping their property secure. But what if the burglars still managed to break in, somehow overcoming all of these different defenses? What did the famed Roman law have to say when it came to defending oneself against intruders? Once again, ancient Romans took home security as seriously as a gladiator takes his morning stretch before stepping into the Colosseum, and the numerous Roman laws are a testament to that. These laws granted citizens the right to defend their domus, home, with the kind of fervor that would make modern-day action movie heroes blush. According to Roman law, if someone broke into your home, you could spring into action and defend your property with whatever means necessary. But here's the twist. The thief had to throw the first punch, or more accurately, the first dagger, before you could legally turn them into a cautionary tale for other would-be intruders. Now let's paint a fuller picture. Picture the scene. The moon hangs high over Rome, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil lamps and the faint tang of the Tiber River. Inside your home, the flickering light of a bronze oil lamp dances across the frescoes of your walls, depicting gods and heroes in dramatic poses. Suddenly, a creak echoes from the atrium. Your heart races. It is an intruder breaking in. According to the law of the 12 tables, if this criminal is caught in the act at night, you're not just allowed to defend your home, you're practically encouraged to raise the alarm and then dispatch the intruder with the efficiency of a seasoned legionary. No need for a polite, "Excuse me, sir, but could you kindly stop stealing my silverware?" Interestingly, we don't have a lot of records detailing how often Roman homeowners actually exercised these rights or how courts handled such cases. Did Roman judges roll their eyes at yet another "I was just defending my home" defense? It's hard to say. But one thing's for sure, Roman law took the sanctity of the home seriously. Your domus wasn't just a place to sleep off a night of wine-fueled revelry. It was your castle, your fortress, your sanctuary. And if someone tried to break in, well, let's just say they might have preferred getting caught by the city watch over an angry homeowner with a gladius. Fast forward to today, and while we might not be allowed to chase burglars through the streets with a gladius, a short sword, the Roman approach to home security still resonates. Modern alarm systems, they're basically high-tech versions of the Roman alarm-raising tradition. Motion sensors and cameras, think of them as your digital household gods keeping watch while you sleep. And while we might not be legally permitted to turn intruders into pincushions, the instinct to protect our homes remains as strong as ever. After all, whether you're a Roman patrician or a 21st century suburbanite, there's nothing quite like the peace of mind that comes from knowing your home is secure, even if it's just from the neighbor's cat sneaking in to steal your leftovers. So the next time you arm your home security system, spare a thought for the ancient Romans. They may not have had Ring doorbells or smart locks, but they certainly knew how to make a burglar think twice. And if all else failed, they had the law and a sharp blade on their side. Just remember, if you ever find yourself in ancient Rome, don't break into a house at night. Trust me, It won't end well. Be sure to like and subscribe for more interesting history content.